people in office to find out how and why they got into office and what they tried to do with the power they acquired for themselves. Years went by, and democracy came back. Prior to that, Ironsi was killed in Ibadan in '66, coups and counter-coups, and all of a sudden, Shagari was elected president of Nigeria in 1979. A year later, Silverbird was born, and the best years of my life was 1980 to 1983. It was a wonderful period. Silverbird grew, and I did great things. And as I look at Nigeria, and the periods of growth for Silverbird were periods of democracy. The military era were very bad for us. In 1980 to 83, it was wonderful. The dollar to the naira in 1980 was $1.97 to the naira. It was $2 to the naira. By the time Buhari overthrew the government, December, 3 years later, it was 3 naira to the dollar. And I understand one of the reasons Buhari gave was the mismanagement of the economy. I did not understand. All I knew was democracy was good for me. The military was very bad. Years went by, Silverbird couldn't grow after 1983. A couple years later, I got appointed executive director for the Black Music Association, working with Quincy Jones and Stevie Wonder and some of the biggest minds in the world. I was excited for myself. And they asked me to do a show in Nigeria, a big show with the Jacksons and Shadi Adu, New Edition, and all the biggest acts in the world at the time. This was supposed to be a show similar to We Are the World that Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie put together. At that time, I was told to write a letter to the president and ask if Stevie Wonder could come and shake hands with the president. I wrote the letter, sent it in to Dodon Barracks. 2 weeks later, a friend of mine told me I was in trouble. I said, what had I done? I simply wrote a letter to the president. They said they immediately ordered an interministerial committee meeting to discuss my letter. I said, me and Stevie Wonder? Surely, what could they be talking about? Believe it or not, they said I was planning a military coup. Otherwise, why would I write a letter to speak to the president, to write a letter to the president for Stevie Wonder to shake his hands on October 1st? Being young at the time, never been involved in a coup as a civilian, I was very troubled. What saved me was the counter coup that brought Babangida to office and Buhari was gone, so I was a happy man. But when that happened, I had a bigger problem. The dates were set, brochures had been printed, Nigeria Airways had been contacted. It was a multi-million-dollar big event. You're talking of 1985. And then something terrible happened, which in hindsight, I now understood how little things can affect the image of the country. Two things. One, during the coup, we had only Nitel. The telephone lines were shut off. They couldn't reach me. For 5 days, the lines were shut off while Babangida tried to consolidate power. While he tried to consolidate power, Americans trying to reach me couldn't. They didn't understand. They said, why would we go to Nigeria and do a show when for 5 days we can't make a phone call? That was one problem. Worse than that, they put Fela Anikulapo Kuti in prison. And as soon as Fela was put in prison, I was summoned to Washington. And they said to me, Mr. Bruce, I want you to explain something to me. How do you put the most famous musician out of Africa in prison? What did he do? Did he kill somebody? I said, well, no, he didn't. He said, well, exactly did he do? I said, well, you know, he was caught at the airport with 1,600 pounds. He said, you put the most famous musician in Africa in prison because he had 1,600 pounds in his pocket. Explain that to me. I said, look, I'm not the president of Nigeria. All I know is he's in prison for 5 years. And he said to me, if you put the most famous musician in prison, surely you don't want us to come to Nigeria. It broke my heart. But the military era was a terrible time for me, for my growth, my development, and that died. And Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson went ahead and did We Are the World, made a lot of money from it, raised money for Ethiopia. I wasn't part of the mix. We had a great opportunity, but I couldn't. The military era was terrible. It was really bad for our economy and very bad for us. But time went by. Time went by. 99.